Hey guys, how's it going? It's Pbogz here once again, bringing you a trifecta video today. Three different things to talk about, all very interesting stuff. We're going to be talking a little bit about some new advertisements I'm going to throw your way, more ways for you guys to pay for coaching, and make it a little bit easier on your pockets. So I think that's going to be quite interesting. We're going to be talking about ways for you guys to win free coaching. I'm going to be using social media to my advantage, and in return, you guys are going to have plenty of opportunities to win free coaching throughout the weeks to months to come. So always want to pay attention with that. But first, we're going to be going over a few hand histories with an aggressive player at the $36 levels when talking about hyper turbos, and I feel like a lot of players do struggle with the more aggressive guys in short stack poker, so I thought it would be something interesting to go over and something to throw at you guys. Alright guys, so as I promised here, a few hand history reviews. First, the same player here. This guy, once again, likes to limp quite a bit, 3 bets a lot, ISOs a lot, tends to put you in some tough spots, but I think that if you just settle down and concentrate on your ranges and figuring out what he's doing certain things with, these kind of guys are pretty easy to diagnose. So why don't we go over a few games first, this one guy. So right here, 8-6 offsuit here, at around 25 big blind effective stacks, first hand. I think this is a spot where this is a hand that you could very easily limp fold, min-raise call as well. Min-raise fold. I prefer to min-raise fold these hands between 20 and 25 big blind effective stacks. Definitely versus realist opponents because I can get a good feel for them. Using that 20 to 25 big blind effective stacks range, I min-raise a lot more just to kind of get a feeling if they're going to 3-bet me a lot, are they flatting a lot, can I run them over with simply just min-raising quite a bit, are they folding to a lot of C-bets, are they floating, all of that good stuff. So it's very important to try to get as much information as you can in these hyper games because you really don't have that much time, right? So focusing on every little aspect is going to go a long way in your progress as a poker player. So first, this guy, though, not necessarily great. In this game here, only 34 hands at these effective stacks, 127 total, and it looks like he was flatting pretty wide here, and I was still trying to get a good feel of how he was playing post-flop. So this could be very easily be a guy that I don't want to be balanced with. I could just min-raise my value and just limp everything else. Definitely since he's fallen to limp C-bets 48% of the time. But I wanted to be a little bit more balanced because I maybe gave him a little bit too much respect initially, but I do think that later on in the game you'll see that I will probably be limp stabbing a lot more with hands like this. He makes it 120 here, obviously not a great sizing. He should go T90, T100 here, so a mistake right off the bat, and we fold. 2-3 here. This is a spot where you could definitely flat if you're playing versus a guy who, a recreational or a guy who's min-raising quite a bit, and he's not really that good post flop, but this guy is kind of awkward post flop and he's not really raising that much. And when I'm playing versus a guy who isn't opening that wide, 2-3 is just so far behind in a sense where I just probably hero fold. I still think flatting here is okay if you understand how he's playing post flop, but if you're not really sure yet, I would just hero fold. 8-5 here, as you see, decided to go with the limp stab instead. And he ISO jams, and as you see, he's ISO jamming not that wide, so his ISO jamming tendencies seem to be value orientated, but his ISO not all in bets could be a little bit more bluffy. So I do think that maybe limp shoving with some ace-x is probably going to be pretty good versus guy. But if he ISO jams, you probably want to hero fold maybe like an ace-2, ace-3, ace-4 type holding. Easy flat for us here. We check back. He bets a little size here. We're getting really good odds to flat here with our gut shot straight draw. So I decide to flat here. And we, miss on the turn. And he bets big again. And we're just going to fold. No problem there. Open folding here. Bottom 10% versus a player who is going to be aggressive with isolations in general. I would just simply open fold my bottom 10%. Realist, I would be playing 100% of my range, so I'd be limp stabbing my bottom 10% versus a lot of unknown players until they show me that they can defend. Here I can definitely check back if I want to. If I'm afraid that this guy is trapping quite a bit, I can definitely check back hands like this because they play really well post flop. They're really good to have in your check back range versus guys who are trapping quite a bit. But this guy, still kind of unknown. Limp trapping, let's see, 2 out of 13. Isn't really limp folding that much, which we like. So he might be calling with weaker holdings. So I decided I would ISO this one. T60, and he folds. Here's a spot where I'm min raise, calling it off, obviously, at around 18.5 big blind effective stacks. With offsuit hands like ace jack, ace 10, you could potentially throw that into your limp trapping range at around these effective stacks and lower. Definitely if you're playing versus a guy who is isolating quite a bit. So that's something you want to kind of keep into your arsenal. Also, you still want to be min raising a lot of your paint cards. I think that min raising and them flatting you isn't the end of the world because we do have that suited equity as well. So it kind of makes it a little bit easier to play post flop. But yeah, if you're not playing versus a guy who is ISOing at all, I would suggest just min raising all of your big ace X type holdings. And he jams, and obviously we call. And we win. And as you see, queen 6 here, not necessarily a bad jam. But if he realized that I wasn't necessarily min raising that wide, this is a really bad jam because I understand that he is flatting really wide and pretty unbalanced out of position. So I'm exploiting him by just min raising a more value oriented range. In return, makes this jam very bad. But if you're playing versus a guy, like if I was playing versus Reg, this would be a really good jam because I'd be min raising a lot more. If he saw me raising like 65-70% of the time in the small blind, this is definitely a plus EV jam as well. So not bad, but he might have a problem with identifying the player he's playing against, which is actually really bad. It can really hurt a player. Limps here. We have 7-5 offsuit. Not really a great hand to isolate with. One thing to look at here is that he is limp folding a lot. 6 out of 6 here, 11 out of 12 here. So this is a spot where you could definitely over adjust and be ISO jamming a pretty wide range versus this type of guy because you could basically jam with any 2 cards versus this guy and it's going to be profitable. But you don't want to be jamming hands that necessarily play all that well post-flop out of position because you're just kind of, folding out all of his equity, all of, his weaker equity. So I think with hands like King Jack and stuff like that, you'd probably want to check back. But hands like this, I mean, if it was 7-5, 7-4, 7-3 suited type hands, I would probably be jamming a lot versus this guy. This one is right on the borderline, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if I jam here. But I do check back, unfortunately. I think a jam that would have been okay. Check, check here. We do pick up some value here. Now, versus this guy, another thing you want to look at is the fact that he is limp c-betting only 54%. And I've seen him check back a lot of air, but I've also seen him check back some middle pairs, some bottom pairs. So it's a spot where he does have some bluff catchers in his range, and he has showed me the ability to make some really bad hero calls. So it's a spot where I'm probably only going to be barreling with a balanced range in these spots where I either have value or some sort of equity where I can still suck out on the river. I think barreling here with absolute air is a bad idea. Now, usually when I play a player who is realist and he checks back, I know that population tendencies suggest that that's going to be a lot of air in his range, right? So I'm attacking, pretty early with a really wide range just to kind of figure out some, reads on him. Plus, I know he's going to be folding a lot in that spot. But for this guy who's checking back, some equity and some bluff catchers, I have to be careful. I have to be a little bit more balanced here. So I do think in this spot I should be barreling. 20, yep, this is fine. And he folds. So obviously checking back some air, which I've seen. But if he's, checking back 8x there, this guy's probably never folding in that spot. Just open folding here, which is fine. Once again, limped here. He's, once again, really weak limp. But this is the type of hand where I'm not necessarily crazy about ISOing. I mean, he's going to be trapping once in a while, right? He's not going to be folding all the time. So I think it's a spot where I really don't want to be jamming too wide here. But this is probably a plus EV shove versus a guy who's folding 92% overall. So, I mean, if you really want to go crazy with it, sure. But it's a spot where I'd rather just check back. We get top pair here, checks back here. really bad turn card here. It's a spot where I think that there are some King X in his check back range, even though he probably should be jamming all of his King X at 8.5 big blind effective stacks. So it's a spot where I decided to check back. I guess if I was playing versus a reg here, a really good reg here, I'd probably barrel off in this spot just because he's going to be jamming all of his King X and he's going to be limp C betting all of his flush draws on this flop. And honestly, he's probably going to be jamming all of his suited connector type hands on this at about 8.5 big blind effective stack. So there really shouldn't be any hard draws in his range. But this guy's not necessarily a reg. He's really not that good, even though he sits lobbies once in a while. But I think at this spot where I decided to check back here and check here, and then the river comes, and at this point in time I feel like I'm probably ahead here. Maybe he has some 10x, some 2x, maybe he tried to trap with an ace here, but that's unlikely. So it's a spot where I'm just going to bet here and try to get some thin value, and he decides to raise here, and his line really doesn't make all that much sense. And if this guy was a reg, I'd probably snap call him. Even though I know a reg wouldn't necessarily do this move all that often. But it's a spot where I've seen him check back some flush draws before as well. And he's probably capable of checking back, you know, some King X on the turn, stuff like that. Not necessarily shoving all of his King X. As you see, his open shove is only about, you know, 16% here. So not that wide, right? So I decided to hero fold here. And those spots, in my opinion, when you're playing versus recreationals, they're more likely to be value oriented in those spots than bluffing. And I really think that goes a long way, and not just being like, oh, well, a reg would never do that, so a recreational would never do that. You have to, you know, separate the two. And that really, you know, goes a long way when playing versus Rex, because a lot of the time they're not taking those kind of lines with air. Once in a while, you're right, they will. But it's a spot where I think that, you know, in a spot like that where he checks two streets and then he jams over me on a river bet, I think it's a spot where he probably has me beat. Queen 4 here, definitely going to limp. Once again, if I'm playing versus a guy who is just folding so much to limp C bets, to min raises, I might just min raise my whole entire range. But it's a spot where, you know, if you're playing versus a guy who's 3-betting a lot, if you're playing versus a guy who is, you know, the kind of guy who is going to be flatting really wide and not that easy to play post flop, these hands are better going for a limp stab or limp folding if you ISOs. Now, if you look at his stats right here, his VPIP suggests that he's only calling 43% of the time over a pretty big sample, which is very interesting. But he's also 3-betting really wide, and you could suggest, you know, min raising here because of his VPIP. But it's only 6 out of 14 here, so it's a spot where I think a lot of little things are playing you know, a role here, and I would need more evidence to suggest min raising would be better here. But with him folding to limp C bets 40% of the time, the safe route is just a limp versus a recreational. Limp C bet here, perfect, and he folds, and that's why. He limps here, easy jam, right? And he calls, and unfortunately he trapped with aces. And this is a setup no matter who I'm playing versus, because I'm always jamming pocket fours more times than not. But it's a spot where, you know, that's why we're not necessarily jamming hands like Jack 4. And because it's a spot where he is trapping once in a while. Pocket aces, pocket queens, pocket kings. These are, you know, even bad players can trap those type of hands. And if you're jamming with a hand like Jack 3, Jack 4 offsuit, you really have no shot of winning the hand. If you have a hand like 7-5, 7-4, you know, you still have that straight draw equity you can suck out. And usually you have 2 live cards. With a Jack X, you know, Ace Jack type stuff, Jack 10 suited type stuff, you can really, you know, get dominated pretty fast.